I think if you were to put up a poll, if I were to put up a poll, or if you were to put up a poll, or if literally anyone in the world were to put up a poll asking the question, were the Chicago Bears the worst team in the playoffs last year? I think everyone would say yes. If you would say, were the Chicago Bears the worst team to make the playoffs in the last 5 years? A lot of people would say yes. This Chicago Bears team last year had no business making the playoffs. A lot of what they did last year came at a time where they had their very obvious dysfunction with the coaching staff, with the personnel on the field. I mean, you look at this team, no team that loses 6 games in a row should make the playoffs. No team that loses 7 of their last 10 games should make the playoffs. But they still did it. And on one hand, you do have to give Matt Nagy, their coaching staff, and Mitchell Trubisky credit for that last year. However, what you can't give them credit for is something that I talked about yesterday in a video I made about the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is something that you can't give the Chicago Bears credit for in general. They cannot be given credit for giving this guy, Matt Nagy, a job. This guy is the most underqualified head coach that I think I've seen in my lifetime. And I said it yesterday with Doug Marrone. You can't win games with someone like Doug Marrone as your head coach. You can't win games with someone like Matt Nagy as your head coach. You can't do it because Matt Nagy is too involved in trying to make himself look good to try to help his team. I mean, you see it. He looks like he's having a great time at Bears camp, throwing dimes to wide receivers or like just making his voice heard. I don't think anyone cares what Matt Nagy thinks at this point. This guy won Coach of the Year and since then has made some of the biggest idiotic moves I think we've ever seen. And really, he only won Coach of the Year because Khalil Mack and that defense that year carried him to that award. So let's talk about what the Bears did well last year. They did not rank in the top half of the league in any statistical category except for passing defense, rushing defense, and points allowed. And even when you think about that, their passing defense was 12th, their rushing defense was 15th, and their points allowed were 14th. They didn't rank in the top half of the league in any offensive category, 25th in takeaways, 17th in sacks. You can't point to any single 1 point on this team and say that they were a decent position group. The wide receivers were down, the quarterback position was down, the offensive line was bad, the running back room was not great, even though David Montgomery is a good player. Running back was not great. They were playing Cordell Patterson a majority of last year. Their corners were not great. Their D-line was not great. Khalil Mack was not great. Their linebackers in general was not great. Nothing on this team was good last year. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm just trashing the players because at the end of the day, I think a lot of the guys that were on this team last year are really good. I think Khalil Mack is a really good player. I think David Montgomery is a really good player. Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller was on when he was on this team. I think Cordell Patterson, if you use him in the right situation and not make him a running back, he can be a decent player for your team. But the way that Matt Nagy, Chuck Pagano, and Bill Lazor utilized their players last year was obviously not good. And that's why they did not rank well in any statistical category. And I've already talked about what they did bad last year, but I kind of want to drive home the point of their turnovers and their takeaways. Just the turnover margin in general. 20th in turnovers, 25th in takeaways. You can't be that bad and hope to be a good team. There's some teams around the league that can turn the ball over a lot. The Buffalo Bills are a team that come to mind. They turned the ball over a lot last year, but at the same time, they took the ball away a lot as well, and it evened out in their turnover margin. The Bears are just not that team that can rely on taking the ball away every other possession from the other team's offense. They just can't. And when you turn the ball over a lot, like the Chicago Bears did last year, they're going to not be a good team. Also, 25th in rushing, that's just really bad. It shows where the offensive line was last year. You pair that with the fact that they were 17th in sacks allowed, and it shows that last year their offensive line just was not at a good spot. Now, who's gone from last year? There's some obvious ones. Quarterback, Mitchell Trubisky, he's gone. They lost 4 receivers over this offseason. Ted Ginn Jr. and Taylor Gabriel both retired. Anthony Miller got traded to the Houston Texans. We love that as Texans fans. DeAndre Carter was signed away. And basically another wide receiver, Cordero Patterson, ended up being signed away as well. They lose left tackle Charles Leno. They lose guard Rashad Coward. And then when you talk about the defense, they did not bring back Chuck Pagano, the defensive coordinator, which I think that's an incredible move. They lose Roy Robertson Harris. They lose John Jenkins, Brent Urban, Barkevius Mingo, and the big one, Kyle Fuller. This team lost a lot, but what I will say about the players that they lost is something that I've said before about teams. If you're really bad at a certain statistical category and you lose the top guys that would affect that statistical category, so like your passing yards. If you have a really low statistical passing yard ranking and you lose your quarterback, I don't really think that you are losing much, because at the end of the day, your quarterback's the only guy that really affects that. I mean, the receivers are responsible for it. Some of the running backs, tight ends are a little bit responsible for that. But the quarterback's the one throwing the ball. The quarterback is the one that is controlling where the ball goes. And if your quarterback is bad, which Mitchell Trubisky has been over the past 3 years, losing him is not going to be a big deal. And replacing him with someone who we're going to talk about later is also something that is probably better for this team. The moves that really the Chicago Bears, there's no real reason to try to even explain, is losing guard Rashad Coward and losing cornerback Kyle Fuller. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know Rashad Coward was a top 10 guard in the NFL last year. All I know is that Rashad Coward started for this team some of the games last year, at least some of the games. He might have been a 16-game starter. He might have been a majority season starter. Again, I don't completely know, but I know that he was a good player on the offensive line. And just losing him for nothing is a bad deal. Same with Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller, at least, has been an all-pro in the NFL. He has been a Pro Bowler in the NFL multiple times. And just losing him for nothing is a terrible look for your franchise. Now let's talk about who's new to the team. They got two quarterbacks that they brought in. They brought in the rookie Justin Fields. They brought in the vet Andy Dalton. They brought in Marquise Goodwin for the receiver room, as well as Damiere Byrd. Signed tight end Jesse James. They also signed Jake Butt, but he retired like a week ago. Running back Damian Williams from the Kansas City Chiefs. They signed Desmond Trufant from Detroit. Jeremiah Atachu, who I think is actually a pretty good outside linebacker from the Chargers. And defensive tackle Mike Pennell, who also came over from the Chiefs. Now, the quarterback situation. This is something that I said again yesterday in my Jacksonville Jaguars video. It's a very similar situation, but it's also a little bit different. So the Jaguars have a young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence that they drafted this year. The Bears have a young quarterback that they drafted in Justin Fields. The Jaguars had a guy who is a vet in Gardner Minshew. The Chicago Bears signed a vet in Andy Dalton. If both of those teams start the vet, they're losing so much value. And it's even worse for the Chicago Bears, because at least with the Jaguars, Gardner Minshew is like 24, 25 years old. And if he proves something in the preseason and the first couple weeks of the season, then he could get traded for a really good, like a first-round pick. That's how good that situation could be for the Jaguars. If Andy Dalton plays well, you really think someone's going to give the Bears a high draft pick for Andy Dalton? He could be a Pro Bowler. Nobody's going to give up anything for Andy Dalton. And with that being said, Andy Dalton playing well for your team does not mean you're going to be a good team. Andy Dalton was at the peak of his career in Cincinnati, and they won 0 playoff games? He played, he was in an incredible system last year in Dallas, and they won, 5 games? 6 games? Andy Dalton has never been the quarterback of a successful team. Andy Dalton has never been the quarterback of a playoff-winning team. And if the Bears don't realize that, and they don't just start Justin Fields outright, this team is going to take a major step back in their progress. And part of it, this is something that I've thought ever since he got hired. This Matt Nagy dude has killed the Bears at every single turn. Every single turn. And if he makes this move with Andy Dalton, if he starts Andy Dalton over Justin Fields, that really could be the final nail in the coffin for Matt Nagy. So last year the Bears went 8-8, second in the NFC North. They lost in the wild card round to the New Orleans Saints. And they just were a bad team last year. Statistically, from a coaching standpoint, they were really bad. They were, what were they? They were not good. They were not good at anything. I was gonna say they're second in third down conversion percentage on offense, but they were actually second worst. So that's also a big coaching thing. So in terms of a prediction this year, they went 8-8 last year. I honestly can't see them winning that many games this year. They had the real good benefit of going in a like 5 to 6 week stretch of really bad teams, and they still lost some of those games. So I'm honestly gonna say in a 17 game season, the Chicago Bears go 6-11, maybe 7-10. If they're super duper lucky, they go 8-9. But I would say the floor for this team is about 4-13 because of how bad they are everywhere. The ceiling for this team is maybe 9-8. This team is really bad. Don't expect anything. If you're a Bears fan, I'm sorry. One of my best friends is a Bears fan, and I don't hesitate to give him shit for it ever. So, if you like this video, make sure you leave a like. If you didn't like the video, make sure you leave a dislike. Any feedback from you at this point is much appreciated. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe. If you want to leave a comment, go ahead. I'm not going to do anything either way. If you do leave a comment, I'll try to respond, but I'm not going to get mad if you don't. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.